meeting by phone by dialing 1-929-205-6099 using meeting ID 89054473374 and password 172838, and via computer at the link provided. Members of the public may also submit comments via the City of Sanford website at www.sanfordmaine.org under Government/City Council/Contact the Council. Would you please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please join me for a moment of silence. And now we'll do roll call. Deputy Mayor Herlihy.
Present.
Councilor Stackpole.
Present.
Councilor Hanselman.
Present.
Councilor Martell.
Present.
Councilor Trench-Montagne.
Present.
Councilor Hitchcock.
Present.
And I'm Mayor Brink, and also present are City Manager Steve Buck and Executive Assistant Larissa Ricketts. And now for the minutes, 23222-02, order to approve the minutes from the regular City Council meeting held on May 2nd, 2023. May I have a motion, please? Ann?
So moved, Madam Mayor.
And a second. Pete?
I second.
Any comments? All those in favor? Unanimous. 23223-01, in order to approve the minutes from the executive session of the City Council meeting held May 2nd, 2023. May I have a motion, please? Yes.
So moved.
Thank you. And a second, please. Ann?
I'll second that.
All right. And any discussion on them? Okay. Oh, Bob, did you have a discussion? You're too fast for me. All those in favor? Thank you. 23224-01, in order to approve the minutes from the emergency meeting of the City Council held on May 9th, 2023. May I have a motion, please? Ann?
Madam Mayor, I'd like to make a motion to accept the minutes with an amendment to include the attendance of Councilor Stackpole via Zoom. He was omitted from the listing of folks in attendance.
I didn't even catch that. Okay, thank you. And a second? Jonathan, thank you very much. And all those in favor? Thank you. And now for the mayor's report. Last Thursday night, we had an emergency city meeting to share with actually it was Tuesday night, we held an emergency city meeting to share with our community what we had learned from the professionals who have worked with asylum seekers in Maine. We sought out advice because, as a council, we wanted to do what would help our new neighbors in the long term and not hurt them. I was amazed at the number of citizens who tuned in for the meeting, both in person and online. Sanford is a very caring community and a great place to live. I'd first like to thank everyone who came to learn and help. As a council, we learned a lot. We had hired a group we sought advice from the Immigration Rights Coalition and shared with our team and the community what works and what doesn't work. We learned not to let our help be a burden by helping them outside the system. By personally providing shelter or lodging for these families, we would be removing them from the system that may hurt them, and it may have hurt them in the long run. For example, they may have been number 50 on a list in Portland for housing, and taking them out may drop them to number 300. As they needed more than a few weeks in a hotel than what we could provide. They needed apartments for long term. These families are coming from desperate situations, but we needed to offer what is available for us and not offer just emergency contingency plans. So here are some next steps people could do if they wanted to help. Please contact or write federal officials and let them know you support this bill. And the name of the bill is Asylum Seeker Work Authorization Act of 2023. This legislation would make asylum seekers eligible to receive work authorization starting at 30 days instead of waiting 150 days. Also, the best to assist asylum seekers staying in Sanford, if you want to find out more to do, go to our webpage and under donations channels for asylum seekers in Sanford. I'd like to thank all who is helping us find out what really works and being willing to do what is needed. I am very proud of our community and their willingness to serve and to help. It was, I think most of us were there, I think we were all there, and it was simply amazing the number of people who came, and it was very positive, and they really definitely wanted to know, how do we help? So it was just kind of warmed your heart to think we live in a community that just reached out. Now, we have some subcommittee meetings because we had several of those last week, and so I'm going to report out on 3 of them. One of them was the Fire Station Feasibility Work Group. We received updates and discussed the next steps on the fire station construction. We now have 2 places, one in Springland that we have now, one in Springvale and one in South Sanford. Both these locations meets the needs of being within a certain distance to address our citizens. So you can please go to our website. There's a whole thing on the report and the studies that have already been done on the fire stations. The other one was the Land Bank Authority, and we're going to see several of these things on our agenda tonight, so I won't report out too extensively on this. But this is a group where before a house or an apartment building is declared dangerous or a piece of property, this is the group that discussed that, and then it gets passed on to the council. Municipal Operations and Property also met this week. Several things were taken up at this, and you'll see a lot of these on the agenda again tonight. One was public parking. One was no ATVs on the rail trail. And we talked about the Hallsworth summer hours, the Memorial Day Parade, which for those people who are wondering when that is, that's May 29th.
Sanford direction.
Oh, it goes in the Sanford direction. Thank you, Maura. And if you're wondering what that is, that's by the park, by the old junior high, and they come up that road, and then they're going to turn left, coming into Sanford. And then we talked about the July 3rd and July 4th activities were also discussed. These will also be on tonight's agendas, so that's just kind of a preview on what you're going to see tonight. And does anyone else have? Ann, go ahead.
I feel like mine are always too long, but I actually have 2 this evening. Keith McBride gave me the okay to share some specific information from the Growth Council. We actually met this morning, and we had a great presentation on the foreign trade zones, and actually received a request for a letter of support to have the existing foreign trade zone number 186 extended to include all of York County. If anybody's interested in learning more about foreign trade zones, I can be applied with coffee or happy hour to talk more about it. Excuse me. But essentially, the board agreed to provide a letter of support for this extension. It would allow current and future Sanford businesses, and as well as other York County businesses, to take advantage of reduced tariff and duties, as well as have special status with Customs and Homeland Security that provides an expedited import and export process and for component parts and for finished manufactured goods. So the Growth Council thought that was a positive thing to support. The board also thanked departing member Ann Lancaster from the SBDC for her service to the organization, and with regret accepted her resignation as a board member. We also then discussed a process for filling the board vacancy, and I did bring forward, and there was consensus around having member representation on that nomination committee, which would include the city as well as the IDC. And finally, we discussed, as we always do, economic activity in housing, industrial development, and downtown, and lots of other things that we can't discuss in public at this time. So that was the Growth Council. In addition, we had a really robust and exciting public safety meeting last week. We had 3 presentations. The first was from the fire department. AC Smith joined us for a presentation. Some data from that presentation: year-to-date incident counts at the fire department are at over 1,500, which is up 10% from 2022. Runs by cause of injury were just over 85% made up of falls, slips, and trips, which reminds me that we really need to get a group together about resources for some of our elderly that are living at home, because I know they make up a big percentage of that. And the next highest cause for our run was motor vehicle related at just 4%. The fire department has had over 24 different trainings already this year, with about 50 hours of training time, including a recent active shooter training that I know both the mayor and I and maybe others were able to attend. And that training was really exciting. We've mentioned this before, but all 4 shifts of the fire department attended, along with almost all of our PD, some of our folks from our dispatch center, SRT students, and over 130 total folks. So just a great training opportunity. Recently, we've also had some folks do confined space technician training. The fire department was also recently awarded a grant for new thermal imaging equipment, which can be used to help find victims in low to no visibility situations. And in terms of hiring and staffing, they have currently begun the process to add 4 staff members to the fire department, which will fill the staffing levels that are currently budgeted, with bringing us to 2 shifts at 12 folks and 2 shifts at 13. And the final thing is that the ALS AEMT higher level licensing, which we discussed during the budget process, is still in the pipeline. Outside of that, and I was super excited to see these folks. The Sanford Regional Communications Center, which we call Dispatch frequently, did a presentation. They are one of 25 PSAPs in the state of Maine, and a PSAP, and I didn't know this, is called is an acronym for Public Service Answer Point. I always call it Dispatch. But it's also one of 3 here in York County. And a really big shout out to Darcy, and I apologize, I should have confirmed this before, Valito. She actually recently won an award for Director of the Year for her accomplishments, motivation, and support of the staff at our Sanford Regional Communications Center. So kudos to her. We are currently staffed, knocking on wood, at 22 full-time dispatchers and 5 reserve dispatchers. Typically, we have 4 to 7 dispatchers on the desk who are responsible for 12 radio frequencies, which I didn't realize how many there were. Our Regional Communications Center covers 11 fire and EMS and 14 police departments or towns, as well as dispatches for 15 fire and EMS agencies and 6 police agencies. So to say they're busy is an understatement. They handled over 30,000 911 calls and 150,000 calls for service in this past year. And a big one for us as a council when we think about the budget process is that we need to understand and start planning for, which I know Steve is on top of, the fact that our computer-aided dispatch system with the Regional Communications Center will have to be replaced in the next 3 to 4 years. It's a very costly investment, and Bill, who did the presentation, likened it to a fire truck at the fire stations, is how they operate. This cost, however, will be shared amongst agencies that are supported by the Communications Center, but it is a $1.5 million investment, roughly, so again, something we'll just be thinking about. And then the final update, and I felt badly because I think we might have rushed the police department a little bit, but we did hear from the police department, and DC Small shared the community advisory group is going well. They recently had a presentation from Mr. Auger about our new historian, and also saw K9 Winston, and he did want to share, and I hope folks hear this, that community advisory group meets the 4th Tuesday of every month at 6 p.m., and folks are really welcome to join that group, drop in, see what's being presented, and go from there. We also heard a success story in my mind from a community member, Jessica Warner, on the success of the Neighborhood Watch on High Street. They have almost 70 participants in that program. And really what I got out of her presentation is that it's creating a real sense of community neighborhood or neighborhood community and connectedness, which maybe didn't exist previously. So to me, that's really exciting. The PD has also begun working on recruitment videos, which the mayor and Steve, I think, are both going to be in. Sergeant Adams gave a quick update on the mental health unit and the yellow flag laws in use in Maine. And finally, we will be seeing, thanks to the help of DPW and the police department working together, our new electronic speed signs going up throughout the city here very soon. And if you've driven by the PD in the last few weeks, you've seen that blinking at you, and it has caused me personally to slow down several times. So thank you.
All right, thank you. Are there any other subcommittee reports? All right. Just to do a little bit of advertising for our website to get people to kind of take a peek at it. What is Jordan's publication called? Is it this?
Main Street Memo?
Main Street Memo is on there. Now, you can sign up for that to get it regularly sent to your email. And she has a bunch of news of what is happening in Sanford. And so that you'll go on and look at it, the top 10 students from the high school are on there at this time. So please feel free to go on the website and sign up for that publication. It's really interesting. Now, we have the city's manager report. Steve?
Thank you. So I do have other topics, but I am going to talk to you first about the asylum seekers and the services that are being rendered. Since we had the community meeting last Tuesday on May 9th, which by my account was very successful. I've had a lot of positive public input since that meeting. Can't go to the grocery store anymore, but you know, that's what people want to talk about. Okay, so since last Tuesday on May 9th, so starting on Wednesday, May 10th, the day after, myself, our finance director, and the community development met with 6 administrators from the Department of Health and Human Services that included the Associate Director of Housing Programs, the Director of the Office of Family Independence, the Chief Operating Officer, the General Assistance Director for DHHS, and 2 of the Deputy Commissioners were also in that meeting. Also, Greg Payne from the Governor's Office, Governor's Office of Innovation, who is the housing advisor, was in that meeting as well, and he has been established as our liaison with the Governor's Office relevant to this topic. State Representative Anne-Marie Mastracchio also came into that Zoom meeting, which was very helpful because I know that she was able to take the outcome of that meeting and relay that back to other legislators, as well as I believe it's, how do I say this appropriately, her roommate there for legislative housing is the co-chair of the Health and Human Services Committee. So there are a number of bills at the state legislature. A multitude of those seek to go from 70% to 90% reimbursement for the General Assistance Program. I talked extensively in there about the lack of the statewide database. That is also a bill that's before the legislature, so that point was really driven home. Points that we covered in that meeting were the untenable situations of overwhelming city resources, the unavailability of housing options and or sheltering, the first entry points, what those should look like, and why I think those elements were broke as far as what happened with us. The voluntary leaving of housed situations in light of or in hopes of or in promise of something bigger and better. The federal distribution of documented asylum seekers and refugees and how that's happening across our country and why that happened here. The lack of state coordination and assignment of resources forcing the human and fiscal impacts down to municipalities, right? We're not seeing a coordinated effort statewide at this point, although I think we have the attention now. We spent a lot of time talking about Title 22, Chapter 1161. That is the General Assistance Program that we administer here at the local level as a state mandate under the law. Talked about the responsibilities related to the General Assistance Program. And we further discussed the human impact upon city staff and our residents as being impactful. It's not just the people that have arrived here newly, but there's an impact to the community from a human perspective as well. We covered a lot of elements about the general assistance law around the 24-hour rule that in this particular situation was unserviceable at best and couldn't be met because of the significant number of individuals that hit us. That was not I believe, not the original intent in the law, but nonetheless, that still sits there and it needed to be addressed. Again, we talked about the lack of the statewide database for cross-checking, and the definition of what an emergency is left open to interpretation and should be further refined. And then Representative Mastracchio did talk to the group about the pending bill, the legislation that is seeking to have that statewide database. So post-meeting, Deputy Commissioner Ham indicated by email that there would be an assignment of resources to York County to help us better address this situation moving forward. The following day on Thursday, Carter Friend did indicate that that meeting had been set up, and they met on this past Friday. So, and again, when I talked with Carter Friend at York County Community Action late Friday afternoon, now the discussion is going to shift. I don't know what those dollar amounts are, but it's going to shift to, you know, what's the highest priority of needs to address using this new funding that's coming through the state. Thursday, the day after that, on May 11th, we had our weekly resource and management meeting. It's called the volunteer meeting, which was held by Zoom and facilitated by Megan Arsberger at the York County Community Action Corporation, so YCAC. I don't want to abbreviate them too much, but York County Community Action, or YCAC. The meeting was to convey impacts, responses, and to further coordinate the application of regional service provisions and resources around the asylum seekers and homelessness, right? It's not just about one category of that's newly hitting us. I want to give recognition for York County Community Action. They are a tremendous partner and service provider, and they've done a tremendous job in facilitating and coordinating the response. And I want to talk a lot to you tonight about that coordination of response as being one of the most critical elements around this whole situation that we've learned. So that we have a tremendous amount of service providers that are part of that weekly meeting. I call it the regional meeting of volunteers and nonprofit elements. In there, we talked about the current census of people that are being served and their specific needs. Specific needs is a key point here, and I'll come back to that. We talked about school enrollment. I've worked with our superintendent. Currently, it's my understanding they have 37 students enrolled. The first enrollment that they did 2 weeks ago, those students started on Monday. The second enrollment that was done this past Friday, those students start either May 19th or 22nd, so that will be coming through. They are looking to hire one additional ESL, or English as a second language, teacher position. And this new arrival of foreign-speaking students puts us just under the 100 population mark of non-primary English-speaking students, and that's an important milestone for us. Once you go over 100, there's an additional funding scenario that comes in that will help support those service provisions. So we're just about at that mark now. We talked about transportation. There are some transportation difficulties with the current public transportation system. They have to do a transfer. They have to use one route and transfer to another bus in order to get to the Hannaford, which is where our vouchers occur. Kudos to the YMCA stepped up and offered their bus to do 2 specific grocery runs per week as part of their services. That's the kind of tremendous response that we're seeing in that regional meeting. Talked about WIC utilization for the expecting mothers. I believe we have 5 that I know of. Talked about coordination of services, food, clothing, resources through identified service providers. This is the huge point that I care most to make here this evening. We've seen incredible waste. We've hauled a truckload of waste, donations, perfectly good materials that were not wanted, not needed, not utilized, that were simply hauled. There is a dumpster at one of the locations where people are being housed of donations that have been made that are not wanted, not needed. So when I say the specific needs, we've drilled down to what the individual's needs are, and that we have a tremendous organization of service providers that can facilitate that and get them the specific needs for shoes, clothing, and others without creating waste. or at least allowing us to provide the opportunity to take those resources that aren't needed for this situation and get them into hands where they are needed. So that's what these meetings have been about. Same thing with food, good coordination there. Healthcare is being taken care of and addressed on-site as well as through NASON and the FQHC and SMHC. Our next steps, I believe this week, we'll start focusing on, well, I know we'll start focusing on the 6-week period. So we've got systems in place that will address this first 6-week period. After that, the general assistance regulations drop off. They've been put on notice already that what this time period is, that they need to be seeking other housing options because they drop off for qualifications under the GA program, so we can talk with service providers about other funding mechanisms and things of that nature. When I watched the news report this morning, Channel 6, when they talked about moving a 90-person encampment that's outside on the properties in Portland, as well as the closure of the expo in August, I can feel my anxiety, my blood pressure going up as to where all of these people are going to disperse to, what situation. So that's my reference to the statewide coordination. This isn't a Portland issue, shouldn't be a Sanford issue. This should be a statewide coordinated effort as to how that's going to take place. Friday, we had a volunteer meeting where we talked with a group of volunteers that were transporting and housing a number of asylum seekers not part of the city's and or our community response. The indication that this non-coordinated effort had been and continues to be detrimental to the people being moved around in said network. We do have names and service providers identified, so we've been working with them to impress upon them the human impact of that random moving and moving individuals into situations where services couldn't be rendered and the detrimental impact that caused. So hopefully that doesn't occur again. Actions moving forward for this week. On Wednesday, tomorrow at noon, we have a meeting with Deputy Commissioner Ham again around general assistance, state response, and the coordination thereof, and again, a better coordinated response. Everybody is concerned with the end of Title 42, which was last Thursday, but we got communications today that apparently the administration is taking a more proactive role in enforcing laws that are currently on the books that weren't being enforced before, that if you are seeking asylum and you came through various other nations without filing for asylum, you are going to be turned away at the border. So there's that new piece of information. So we'll meet with DHS again on Wednesday. Then on Thursday, we're meeting with DHHS yet again. It is a resource. For Thursday morning, we'll meet with DHHS with York County Community Action on the weekly regional coordination meeting, and I believe we'll start talking about after the 6-week period, what takes place then, and the anticipated influx of people needing further housing. Also on Thursday afternoon, there's a number of us that will be attending. They called out certain specific communities, Sanford, Portland, Brunswick, and there's a few others that are in a listening session with DHHS to develop a better response under the General Assistance Program. So my indication to you is this is consuming tremendous amounts of administrative time on this topic. Hopefully, we will get positive results out of this. So in summary, the city hit its capacities to identify housing and or shelter options. We're still on that same point. The large influx was the result of, and these are my words, chaotic distribution of people by volunteers promising sheltering and services that are not available in Sanford. And we talked to them about the detrimental impact. There has been a tremendous waste of donated resources around the volunteer services. We encourage everybody to go through the coordinated response mechanisms. There is a network that's been set up for that, where we can take in meaningful donations and services and coordinate those. So if you go on the city's website at Sanford, www.sanfordmaine.org, scroll down to the bottom of the homepage, there's a section called Donations Channels for Asylum-Seeking Families in Sanford. If you would click on that, there's an ongoing list of those organizations where you could give money, clothing, food, offer volunteer hours and such, and those will be part of the coordinated effort that will go out as far as our community response. So I encourage you to utilize those avenues because they're well coordinated. There's going to be a further public release on that as well, and they have proposed to identify, I'm not giving the information yet because they're still firming that up. There's an individual that said that he or she will serve as a single point of contact. So a phone will ring into that single point of contact, and then those will be distributed out. And I also know that one of the most positively impactful actions that was taken from the community meeting was the call for people to respond to their state and federal legislators. Feedback was that was more than effective. Shall I say it that way? More than effective. The message was heard. So there's a lot of discussion in Augusta now. I put at the backside, before I get into the other elements, I put in the backside of this, I apologize for the formatting, but it was simply me downloading the information that came from the governor's office at the tail end of last week on the change package. And in there are many positive points if passed as is, building more housing, an additional $50 million, so a total of $80 million to address housing needs across the state, several different categories there. Establishing the Housing First program as a division within the Department of Health and Human Services to address chronically homeless needs. Supporting emergency shelters to address homelessness adds $12 million in one-time funding for emergency housing relief created by the governor. Thank you. My concern is there's nobody to pay it to because it's not there, right? So you have to create it and then be able to pay to it. Let's see. Tackling food insecurity, $2 million put there. Strengthening emergency medical services, another $31 million put there. That's going to go back to as far as our ambulance providers, so positive movement there. Modernizing Maine's business incentive program, $4.6 million going into that to incentivize workforce training. Another $5 million in building the workforce. $2.3 million towards an apprenticeship program. And $4 million to continue to address the cost of child care. The list goes on and on and on. So there's just a tremendous amount of positive improvements in there that gets back to the heart of what we're dealing with, homelessness in general, but the overburden of having a new category created by this situation. Other points that I didn't have a chance to type up the full report, but the electrical outlets that were discussed for the River Street project, we have a firm quote back on that at $35,000. I directed the Public Works Director to implement that. That's a reasonable cost that would allow you to put the decorative lighting on and such. The fixtures will be 10 feet up in the air, so they can't be, messed with inappropriately and such under that. They'll be on a separate circuit, so we can put the circuit on a photo-eye timer combination and be able to control those for decorative lighting and such. And we may be making an application, we will be making an application towards getting that funded through one of our philanthropic organizations here. I didn't bring the materials with us tonight. That's going to come forward in a future presentation, but York County continues to work on the public safety training facility that will be adjacent to the jail in Alfred, as well as more than doubling the beds for drug and alcohol rehab at Layman's Way. Very, very positive points for our city, and they want to talk to us about a service contract to provide some services there. So I talked with the county administrator, Greg Zinser, today that we could do a combined presentation, do a presentation to the council about what the complex looks like, what it is they're going to be asking from us. I know they're going to extend water and sewer from from the city there, but they're also going to be asking us to provide certain services relevant to that new complex that's being developed. Town of Alfred is going to hold a discontinuance public hearing. That's a three-step process. They had to vote for that first, so they voted that their last selectmen's meeting. Now they're going to hold a public hearing on May 30th, and then the meeting after that, they'll hold the third required meeting. It's a three-step process to discontinue a road. So this is the Stone Road, and when I read the discontinuance document, it's for from the center of the, not bridge, but minor span, from the center of the minor span, 500 feet inland, so not all of the Stone Road, but that portion, they're going to discontinue. So unless instructed otherwise, I am going to go to that meeting and express to them that Sanford isn't a butter and we are due damages consideration. So that I've been encouraged
Steve,
by
what
our
does that
legal
mean?
counsel to do that. So when you do a discontinuance on a public way, you have to look at all of the abutters around that have been served or could be served by that property. And if the discontinuance causes them to be underserved or unserved, then damages are due.
Okay.
It all depends on what type of discontinuance action you take as well. It's my understanding they're not going to discontinue the public right-of-way, but they're going to discontinue the use and maintenance. So the public easement would not be dissolved, but they're going to stop maintaining it as a public road, but the public easement will stay in place. In other words, they're not going to touch the bridge and they're not going to plow it. They'll bullhead the snow at wherever the 500-foot mark is and just turn around and come out, so. As our city had been prior to this, when the bridge was still open, we had an agreement, Town of Alfred plows for us out on the Jabung Road for a short piece where Alfred and Sanford cross over, and in exchange, we were plowing the Stone Road. We were coming across the Haybrook Bridge, plowing the Stone Road, turning and coming back. So we had a good exchange program there. And the last thing that I didn't put anything in here on, the news group. I continue to want to call out to the for the lack of the formal name, but the group of community members that are working to reestablish a newspaper in our community with the closure of the Sanford Springvale News. Zendel Bouchard is very active in that and advising and such into that. So I've given you the status reports on that before. They've made huge progress. I didn't talk with Jordan again since the last meeting that she had. But again, they continue to make great progress on that. They may be looking for some full-time paid services. They're looking at funding mechanisms and such. So I'm in hopes that we will get back to both an online newspaper presence as well as a specific section in the Reporter that's already a print section for us to get more coverage for our city. So thank you.
Thank you, Steve. All right, any communications, presentations? None? And public participation, did we have a list?
I don't think anybody's signed, but I'll check.
I don't think we have anybody on there, Steve. No, okay. All right, public hearings. The city council will take public comments on the following. 23205-01, public hearing to receive comments in favor or against the new application submitted by, I think it's Taché? Stash?
Like
Oh.
mustache, stash.
I just wanted to give it an accent. Stash LLC for adult use retail cannabis stores licensed at 9 Renaissance Way, Sanford, Maine. I'll open the hearing. Are there any comments?
I
Then I'll-
have
go ahead.
one comment.
Yes.
The inspection team has done all of the work there, said they've never seen anything like this before. As in the build-out is just amazing.
Oh, okay, good. Fantastic. No comments, so did I just close the hearing? Just close the hearing? All right, there we go. 23218-01, open the hearing, a public hearing on the ordinance amendments to the City Code, Section 149-5, licensing, retail housing, and other sections of the code to establish additional requirements for short-term rentals and requirements for documenting property insurance for all rental housing, and including amending the fee schedule for lodging establishments. And Ian, I take it you're going to report out on this.
Good evening. My name is Ian Houseel. I'm the Director of Community Development. I'm here to speak in favor of adopting this ordinance for this public hearing. I'd like to take a few minutes and walk you through the ordinance. This ordinance was proposed by the Land Bank Authority and reviewed by the Zoning Subcommittee over 3 meetings. It's been worked pretty well. And so the first section talks about additions or adds additions to the purpose section. So in section 2, it's to preserve and improve is the addition, the value of land and buildings throughout the city and discourage speculation. And then additionally, items 7 and 8 were added to preserve residential quality of neighborhoods and residential uses to the benefit of Sanford residents and discourage conversion of housing to transient uses. And 8, support economic opportunities for residents of Sanford and support the tourism economy in Sanford through positive overnight accommodation experiences. So the goals here were to establish additional short-term rental requirements, and that's what I'm talking about there with the additions to the purpose section. This ordinance was based on best practices throughout the country. National League of Cities was looked at, along with a number of other organizations in the state and outside the state of how to best regulate short-term rentals. So a short-term rental under definitions is the renting of housing for a period of 30 days or less. And then as far as pertinent sections, to the standards, it sets minimum insurance standards for short-term rentals and all rentals for that matter. And under that section, documentation of general liability and property insurance of at least $500,000, and additionally sufficient coverage of property replacement or demolition removal. The committee discussed that particular section over a number of meetings and wanted to make sure that there was sufficient coverage for a property that had, say, a fire and would need to be removed and demolished, as opposed to letting it sit for a number of sometimes years, or a property owner taking a payout and selling the property as is. I did review this with legal counsel on 2 occasions. I put this before City's legal counsel as well as the Maine Municipal Association legal counsel. And they said it was perfectly allowable to require insurance, and did make the point that that you'd have to limit the requirement to sufficient coverage. Was MMA specific requirement, was their specific suggestion for a requirement. I would like to talk about this again with the zoning committee next time we meet as well, if we can adjust this a little bit before final reading. And then additionally, the section B of this section talks about to maintain good standing under rental housing. You'd have to have an insurance policy on record with the city council with the city with your annual license application, showing your policy's declaration page. And then if you cannot document insurance, then you wouldn't be eligible for the Good Neighbor credit any longer. And this would also include a phase-in of an escalating fee. So if you didn't have insurance beginning in 2025, your license fee would increase by 2, double, and would multiply by 3 beginning in 2027, so 2 years after that. As far as the short-term rental standards go, short-term rentals would be allowed in primary residences. So specifically, a short-term rental in the urban zone, single-family zone, or residential development zone must be the primary residence of the owner. And you may have them in multi-unit properties, may have up to one short-term rental in a multi-unit property, and a single-family property may have up to one short-term rental and may rent up to 2 rooms when it's defined as a guest home, and a guest home is already defined under Chapter 280. I talked about the insurance requirements as well. Insurance would be mandatory for all short-term rentals. It also sets an occupancy limit. The occupancy limit shall be based on a calculation of 2 adults per bedroom and shall be finally determined by the code enforcement officer. And the occupancy limit must be posted in a conspicuous location at the short-term rental on a certificate designated by the code enforcement officer. Parking, sufficient on-site parking shall be documented by the property owner, and no on-street parking is allowed. Excuse me, I'll say that again. No on-street parking is allowed for a short-term rental, and on-site parking must be demonstrated. And then the fee is according to a lodging establishment, and I'll talk about that in just a moment, and also being clear that there is no vested right, because this is a license. There are some short-term rentals that are operating through the city, but if they don't meet these standards, they will no longer be allowed to operate as a short-term rental after 2023. And then additionally, this ordinance increases the lodging establishment fee from $50 per unit per year to $100 per unit per year.
Ian, I have a couple of questions. Under the minimum insurance, the $500,000, is that what you're going to be changing, the wording?
The wording is trying to make sure, no, not the $500,000. So documentation of general liability and property insurance of at least $500,000, but additionally sufficient coverage for property replacement or demolition and removal. So
My
that's sufficient.
concern with this $500,000, we have people who rent homes that aren't worth $500,000. So how could you get insurance for $500,000 if your home isn't worth $500,000?
That's a good point.
I try.
And we can revisit that. I'm going based on just inquiries of insurers. This seems to be a minimum level of insurance for those properties. But I agree with you that if your house isn't valued at that, then you wouldn't be getting that level of coverage.
Yeah, so I think this needs to be reworded because it says basically you have to do that. So add a 3rd floor, 4th floor, that's about the only way you're going to get up there in price. So thank you. The other question I have is, we talked about a primary residence for somebody. Is there, like, I know some states say you have to have 6 months, you have to live in that for it to be primary. I don't know what we have in Maine. Do we have something like that that actually covers this?
It does. It's defined in Chapter 280, and it talks about that time frame that you need to live there on an annual basis.
Okay, thank you. And do you know what that is?
Off the top of my head, I don't, but I can have that for you for the next time we look at this, and we
Okay.
can also talk about it with the zoning committee next time.
Thank you.
Mhm.
All right, thank you. Does anyone else have any questions? Yes.
Thank you for your presentation, Ian. Can you go over the reason for the change in the fee structure again? I noticed you're basically doubling that, and that would be for these short-term rentals and all other rentals as well, correct?
So all rentals are basically at $100 per year. So a single-family property that is a rental, a long-term rental, is $100 per year. As you get into the higher unit counts, so properties greater than 5 units, you're going to see that fee taper off. The reason being that we're changing this to be from 50 to 100 was conformance between something that is a short-term rental and a rental property that's normally rented for a long-term basis. So if you were a short-term rental now, then you would be paying a $50 per unit fee versus $100 like the other rentals. So it was creating an incentive to create short-term rentals over long-term rentals. That was the idea. The $100 also applies to all motels and hotels as well. So it's changing it from 50 to 100.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Yes, Ann?
Madam Mayor, I get confused sometimes. Should we be having this discussion under the agenda item or through public hearing? I have quite a few items of conversation I want to have, and I think it's usually addressed under the agenda item.
I think the wording we have to do under here.
There's
Is it, or?
some clarity? We can get some. I'd say get some clarity so anybody who else wants to comment can comment, and then I think probably then deal with it under our agenda.
I just have quite a few things I want to discuss, so I don't know what the most appropriate place to do that.
Well, Ian, what do you think? Now? Or should we wait?
I'm at your pleasure, so
Okay.
it's however you would like to do it.
This is technically for the public to comment, and then we get the whole agenda item.
Okay. All right, so you're going to wait till the agenda item. Okay, we do have Diane, has her hand up, Diane Conley.
Yes, Madam Mayor, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I have a question for Ian. Was there any other towns or cities that you saw with this insurance policy that you've written that had something similar? Can you name some towns or?
I think you're asking, are there other municipalities, possibly in the state of Maine, that have insurance requirements?
Yes, or in the United States that you found that had similar policies for this $500,000 for the insurance?
It's very interesting with this regard. There's actually very little examples of this, of having insurance requirements. Recently, the state of Rhode Island passed a insurance requirement statewide. I believe the state of Washington has passed an insurance requirement statewide. But on a municipality basis, I did look through general code, so we have access to ordinances, anybody who subscribes to that service, to see if I could find examples of insurance obligations, and there are next to none. Insurance's requirements are common, just not necessarily in housing, which is very much an oddity, and especially when housing is such an important topic at this time, and also impacts communities so greatly. Meaning, if the fact that some of these properties sit for an excessive amount of time because they don't have insurance. But to your specific answer, excuse me, and I want to say, insurance is also very common in other kinds of license categories throughout the state. So our legal department's opinion was that it is very allowed. However, it is uncommon in housing. So that's the answer.
Thank you. Madam Mayor, I have one more question, if I may.
Yes, go ahead.
To be honest with you, I really didn't read that much into it. I think 500,000 is a little excessive. But one thing I'm not hearing, nor did I see, unless I missed it, was the advertising of this business, I call it a business, in single-family residentials having signage on their properties, advertising this. And I was wondering if our sign ordinance is going to prohibit that, and how that's going to work.
Ian?
I really don't have an answer, Ms. Conley, for that. I think you're asking, is signage allowed specifically for short-term rental? I'd say, though, that the sign ordinance does cover when signs are allowed, And I'd have to look specifically at the ordinance as to whether or not they are allowed on a permanent basis for your example of single-family properties. And I think the answer to that is they are not.
Okay, I just wanted to ask. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for all your comments. I think that is it, so that hearing is closed. Thank you. 23226-01, a public hearing to take comments on ordinance changes making permanent the emergency measures previously approved regarding the management of public parking in the School Street parking lot and previous provisions of alternate off-street parking during the snow emergencies. And is this Matt, or who is doing? Oh, Steve,
I
go
can
ahead.
cover this. So on March 21st, the City Council enacted an emergency ordinance, the purpose of which was to get at the inability for the city to maintain the School Street parking lot in an appropriate fashion because of the large number of vehicles and trailers that were parked there on a semi-permanent basis, disallowing proper snow removal. That parking lot is servicing a number of businesses and agencies within that region that were being detrimentally impacted by that. So the emergency ordinance was established, the ordinance there. The emergency to respond to that lack of maintenance was addressed. It was part of the address on that. The council passed that. It was implemented immediately and produced very positive results. But part of that positive result also was the establishment of 2 alternate locations, the Heritage Street parking lot as well as the Benton Park parking area, whereby those would be cleared so people could, when a snow ban was coming in, they could move to those lots, park there overnight, and then within a 24-hour period after the parking ban was lifted, they could go back to their other on-street and other parking situations. We only had one snow event, but that went well for us. I'm not wishing for more snow, but I think was hoping for a little more testing there. But by all accounts, it worked well. And if you go look at that parking lot today, it's in far better shape. It's been cleaned up. It's working well. So as part of the public hearing, I definitely, when we get to this item for the first read, I would make a recommendation that the council move forward with approving this on a permanent basis. One last thing, the way the emergency ordinance was written, and it established another set of exhibits that for the alternative parking scenarios, so that could be amended in the future if there was a need for more of those areas or need to move that around and such. So it was specifically drafted to allow for that change in the future if need be. Thank you.
Thank you. The hearing is closed. Under consent agenda, is there any of these items that anyone wants pulled? If not, they're so approved. Old business, 23-113-10, confirm the findings and order adjudicating 2 Libby Lane to be a dangerous building and a nuisance pursuant to 17 MRSA Section 2851-2859 at the hearing held on May 2nd, 2023, and authorize the city manager to sign the findings and order for the city council and have the city clerk record it in the registry of deeds and advertise or serve it upon the owner and the parties in interest as required by law.
I'll make a motion to confirm the findings for 2 Libby Lane.
Second. Pete?
I second that.
All those in favor? There we go. 23-14-01. Confirm the findings and order adjudicating 12 Central Avenue to be a dangerous building and a nuisance pursuant to 17 MRSA Section 2851-2859 at the hearing held on May 2nd, 2023, and authorize the city manager sign the findings and order for the city council and have the city clerk record it in the Registry of Deeds and advertise or serve it upon the owner and parties in interest as required by law. Do I have a motion, please?
I'd like to make a motion to confirm the findings in order for 12 Central Avenue.
And the second is Pete. All those in favor? All right. 23-215-01, confirm the findings and order adjudicating 789 Main Street to be a dangerous building and a nuisance pursuant to 17 MRSA, Section 2851 and 2859, at the hearing held on May 2nd, 2023, and authorize the city manager to sign the findings and order for the city council and have the city clerk record the Registry of Deeds and advertise or serve it upon the owner and parties in interest as required by law. Do I have a motion, please? Pete,
Yeah, motion to pass?
second? Nate?
I'll second.
All those in favor? Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, under new business, she's going to love this. 23-172-01, in order to accept and approve the city financial reports for the fiscal year 22-23 as of April 30th, 2023. Ronnie, are you reporting out on this? Come on up.
Good evening, Ronnie Champlin, Finance Director for the City of Sanford. Tonight I'm before you to present the financial report summary for the first 10 months of the fiscal year of 2023. The following financial report provides a summary of the revenue and expenditures of the city for the first 10 months of fiscal year 23. This report aims to give the City Council an overview of the financial performance and position of the city, highlighting key revenue sources, expenditure categories, and notable financial events during the time frame July through April. This time frame ends 44 weeks of operation, having a target of 84.6% for an annualized budget administration. The revenue report, including real estate and personal property tax collections, closed at 88.3% or 3.75% over target year to date. During the first 10 months of fiscal year 23, real estate tax revenue accounted for the majority of the city's income. The total real estate tax revenue collected amounted to $32 million. This represents a 4.2% increase compared to the same period as last year. The growth in tax revenue can be attributed to several factors. Some common drivers in Sanford are increased property assessments and new construction. The city also received grants and funding during the period totaling $2.7 million. These special revenue funds were primarily allocated for a variety of projects contributing to the city's overall revenue. Some of these projects were for distracted driving, speed enforcement, the Brownfields Multipurpose Grant, and assistance to firefighter grant for overtime, to name just a few. In addition to tax revenue and grants, the city generated income from various other sources, such as $259,000 for licenses and fees, $224,000 for building permits, and $1.1 million for ambulance fees. The total revenue from these sources for the first 10 months can be found individually on the revenue report included in your packet. The expense report closed at 86.7%, just 2.1% over target year to date. The city's operating expenditures for the first 10 months amounted to $29 million. These expenses encompassed a wide range of categories, including but not limited to $12,432,000 for personnel costs, $5.6 million for employee benefits and insurance, $131,000 for maintenance and repairs, $320,000 for utilities, $2.5 million for contract services, and $737,000 for non-contractual services. During this period, the city also invested in capital projects to enhance infrastructure and improve public services. The total capital expenditures for the first 10 months of the fiscal year reached $4.5 million. The largest capital project included the use of $2.8 million aimed at maintaining streets and roads. Fiscal year 23 witnessed some significant events, one being staffing shortages. Sanford, like many municipalities, faced staffing shortages across various departments. The second significant event was the increased need for general assistance. The use of general assistance in Sanford increased based on economic conditions, changes in social welfare policies, and individual circumstances. This event had and continues to have an impact on the city's revenue and expenditure patterns, requiring careful financial management and strategic planning. General assistance at the end of April was $310,000 over budget, with 70% of the $328,000 spent in non-contract services being reimbursed by the state of Maine. Our 30% unbudgeted share at the end of April was $98,000. Looking ahead, it's crucial for the City Council to continue monitoring revenue trends and align expenditures with the city's priorities. While revenue growth has been positive, it is essential to evaluate the potential impact of external factors, such as economic conditions and legislative changes on future revenue streams. Additionally, maintaining a prudent approach to managing expenses and identifying opportunities for cost savings will contribute to the city's long-term financial stability. In conclusion, the first 10 months have demonstrated a positive revenue trend for the city, primarily driven by tax revenue and grants. Operating and capital expenditures were carefully managed to ensure the effective delivery of essential services and the execution of key projects. The City Council's continued focus on prudent financial management will help sustain the city's fiscal health and support its goal and objectives. Thank you for your time.
Well, thank you for your report. Does anyone have any questions? Jonathan?
I have a question for, I don't know, for maybe you or for Steve.
Oh, I think it's for Steve.
Probably.
Easy. At least you showed up this time.
I was sick, honestly.
No, I remember we had touched on the general assistance, I think it was at the last meeting, but we're at 223% used, which is probably significantly worse now.
This is only as of the end of April.
So I'm just curious if that's, if you could go over what those expenditures were and how much impact the last couple weeks have had on that. Please, thank you.
And which one of you is going to tackle that one?
I think Steve can you pull up the Main Street report? Because I believe Jordan had that information. It was all spelt out based on the need that was provided for April by category.
Just a minute, yep. So,
It's the one that just came out.
yep.
Municipal monthly?
I got to open my email up here first.
Yeah,
Right.
she does need it, yeah, 'cause I thought it
Correct.
was in there.
Yeah, Councilor Martel, what you're referencing is the expense lines. You have to look at the expense versus the revenue. So we get reimbursed 70% on that expense. So you have to take in that additional revenue because our expense is over what we budgeted. So we budgeted a net expense of $155,000 in there.
This only goes through the end of April, so it's not going
Yeah.
to capture the...
But that's the period that, it's not going to capture this current month, so. I'll pull
So
it up.
Jonathan won't really get the report until next month on what just happened,
Correct.
all right, when we close out.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
this is before that happened.
Right. My office
Right.
hasn't seen any expenses over the last 2 weeks yet. So you'll see that in the May report.
Okay,
I'm
thank you.
pulling the report up here now. If that's the report that you wanted to reference?
Yeah, that's the one we got today.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have that.
Any other questions? Pete?
When right now, we get 70% back from the state for general assistance?
Yes, only on the qualified expenditures. So when we look at the program, there's a housing allowance that's allowable, there's food allowances that are allowable. It depends on the individual size of the family, such as that. There's other necessities. There's separate for diapers and such into that. So when you put all of that together, those are qualified expenses. We pay that out under the program as it's defined, and please note that each October, your GA director will come to you when the state pushes out the new housing allowances. That changes every year, so you readopt that so that we'll change those criteria. But, so those are qualified costs. Those are expended, and then we file for 70% reimbursement from the state on those. That does not count your administrative overhead of running the program itself. None of that is qualified for reimbursement.
Is that a timely manner they pay out, or is that like everything from the state that will be?
No, they reimburse on a timely manner.
Okay. That was my big question on the 70% when, so we don't have a deficit. You know, that was my question. Thank you.
But changing that to the proposed 90% would be a game changer. It would take the administrative burden off. It wouldn't change any of the 24-hour pieces or anything of that nature, but it would take some of the financial burden off in the community.
I spoke to Senator Matthew Harrington, and he's a co-sponsor on that bill, and he's very confident that's going to fly from both sides of the aisle. So it's looking really good.
Well, I'm not sure which bill is going to actually be passed. There's multiple bills seeking for that 90, right? Yeah, seeking for that 90%. But yeah, it seems to have very good support, both sides of the aisle, as far as going to the 90%.
Yeah, when you get both sides of the aisle, usually it fares well. Thank you.
Any other questions? Pete, you sure you're done?
I am done.
I need an order to accept the report, please. Nate?
I move to accept the financial report as of April 30th, 2023.
Thank you. And the second?
I'll second that.
Jonathan, and all those in favor? So you see, it's not just you guys that I try to embarrass, it's also us. So 23-19801, in order to accept the resignation of Jessica Light from the Recreation Advisory Board. Can I have a motion, please? Ann?
Madam Mayor, I'd like to make a motion to accept Jessica Light's resignation with regret from the Recreation Advisory Board.
Thank you. And second?
I'll second that.
Jonathan? All those in favor? Thank you. 23-199-01, in order to accept the resignation of Albert Alexander from the Trails Committee. Can I have a motion, please? Pete?
Yeah, I motion to accept his resignation, Albert Alexander.
Thank you. Second, Jonathan?
I'll second that.
Are those in favor? 23-207-01, in order to accept the resignation of Jeff Wells from the Trails Committee. May I have a motion, please?
Motion to accept the resignation.
Thank you. Second, Nate?
Second.
All those in favor? And I'd like to just make a comment. I'd like to thank the three of these people for serving on the committees. And we've got some other people that we'll be appointing at the end of this meeting to some of the other committees also. So it's, we have a lot of committees here in Sanford. We try to get as many citizens involved in our committees as possible, because the more people who help to run a community, the better off our community is. So I just want to thank these people, and hopefully they'll find another committee in the future they would like to be a part of. 23-219-01, in order to appoint Jamie Cole, Alex Hoare, Aaron Ledger, and what? Oh, Lederer. Okay, Aaron Lederer, I'm going to, how many times am I going to have to say your name wrong? Lederer.
Twice.
Twice, okay. And Jenny Wood as City of Sanford Code Enforcement Officer, and to appoint Jamie Cole as local plumber inspector, and appoint Alex Hoare, Aaron Lederer, and Jenny Wood as alternate plumbing inspectors for a period beginning July 1st, 2023, and ending on June 30th, 2024. Can I have a motion, please? Pete?
I motion for that to pass. Thank you.
Do you want to try saying all those names? No, I'm only kidding. I'm only kidding. The second, please. Ann?
I'll second that, Madam Mayor.
All those in favor? Thank you. All right. 2020-01, in order to appoint Aaron Lederer and Jenny Wood as constables for a period beginning July 1st, 2023, and ending June 30th, 2024. Be it further ordered that this appointment is empowered to enforce civil violations of the city code, including any amendments made or any emergency ordinances that have been approved and adopted by the city council order, and has empowered to serve civil summons for violation and said city code. Be it further ordered that this appointment is not allowed to carry a firearm concealed or unconcealed in the performance of duties or to make arrests. May I have a motion, please? Maura?
I'd like to make a motion to appoint Aaron Lederer and Jeannie Wood as constables for the period of July 1st, 2023 to June 30th, 2024.
Thank you.
Big funny.
May I have a second, please?
And
Jonathan?
I'll second, I do have a question.
Yes,
May.
go ahead.
Since they'll be carrying out some of these duties, will they get, I mean, they can't carry a firearm, will they get a radio or anything like that, so that if they get into a situation
I
that's
don't know.
bad, that
Ian.
at least they'll have communication?
So they're not, they're constables, they're not police officers. They don't carry radios, they carry cell phones. And it's an addition to their duties as code enforcement. Usually primarily what they're doing as a constable is they're allowed to serve civil process within the municipal bounds. So you'll sometimes see, for example, the dangerous building hearing, that they've served an individual when they live or reside in the city, and they can do that rather than using the sheriff. They also have the ability to write tickets. However, through a constable, a civil ticket, which is a direct summons to court, but we've never used that. We've been able to resolve everything without that. But it is an option.
All right, thank you.
Thanks.
Jeepers, if I could write tickets, I might even want to do that job. All right, all those in favor? Thank you. 23209-01, in order to accept the bid for complete replacement of the Department of Public Works garage vehicle exhaust extraction system from the Clean Air Technology, Inc. of Belmont, New Hampshire, in the amount of $74,443. Is Matt reporting out on this, or are you, Steve? Matt is on? I don't see him.
Good evening. Thank you. So our municipal garage at 156 School Street was constructed in the late 1960s. And the original exhaust extraction system, when the building was expanded, was ripped off the original building and then retrofit onto the expansion. So we had been applying over the years for capital improvement program money in order to improve the system. And during the course of just general use and repair, it has aged out and now requires a full replacement. Obviously, standards have also changed since then. We have different exhaust systems, different metrics on what's healthy for somebody to breathe, and also, most importantly, kind of a paradigm shift within the department, trying to get a good working environment and clean air. So we initially had gone out to bid for retrofits. And then when the system failed completely, we were forced to go back out and get quotes on full replacements. So the proposal we have in front of you tonight from Clean Air Technology represents the one we are recommending. It's the most well thought out proposal, most comprehensive, and comes from a company that has done a lot of vehicle exhaust extraction systems, notably from the fire department and surrounding communities' fire department. So trying to keep the air clean in the garage when we can't open the doors in the middle of winter and things like that. So it is hopefully a good solution to get a better working condition for a garage.
Thank you, Matt. Any questions? May I have a motion to approve, please? Pete?
I motion to approve Let's see, you want me to read this? The Department of Public Works Garage Vehicle Exhaust Extraction System from Clean Air Technologies for the amount of $74,443.
Thank you. And a second?
I'll second that.
Thank you. All those in favor? Oh,
Sorry,
one
Madam
second.
Mayor, I do have a question.
Any questions? Yes, sorry, Ann.
I just wanted to get the vote. So Steve reminded me at the subcommittee level that this was part of our CIP. So can you just remind me also what happens now that we're using these funds currently before the end of this fiscal year to the funds that are in the CIP? Will those be something we'll just discuss at a future point in terms of reallocation or different use?
I might be able to answer that.
Oh, thank you,
just initially. So the proposal itself breaks the work into separate portions. So there's the materials like the fan, the blower, the pipe, the connectors and things like that. So the materials total on the estimate or the proposal are in the amount of $27,779, and then the installation is the remainder. So what we're proposing right now is to, with dollars that may be available at the end of this fiscal year, buy the materials up front, and then the installation schedule is currently booking it 6 to 8 weeks out. That's on a good schedule. So we would pay for the materials up front, and then for the installation, we would do that in the following fiscal year, and we would have the option either to take it out of our O&M funding, out of building improvement, for which it was not budgeted and would be a stretch. We also have a capital reserve account that we do have enough funds in here to pay for this, or just enough funds in here to pay for this. So we could take the installation out of that. And that comes from our equipment sales of equipment that's effectively aged out of service.
Thank you, Matt. Any other questions? All those in favor? Thank you.
Thank you.
23-173-01, in order to approve street closures as presented for the Memorial Day Parade on May 29th, 2023. And Brady, I'm assuming you're reporting out on the next few ones?
Yes. Good evening, everybody. So like it was mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, the Memorial Day Parade is heading south this year. So the staging will start, the parade will start at the Armory, and the staging will be along William Oscar Emery Drive. They then leave the Armory, they go up Goen Park Drive, they turn left down 109, and then they end at Central Park. Parks and Recreation, as we discussed in prior years, is responsible for the street closures and coordinating with the fire and police department. The Southern Maine Veterans Committee puts on this parade. The parade will start at 10 a.m. and William Oscar Emery will be shut down around 9 a.m. through traffic, so everybody can be safe staging for the parade. This was presented at Property Sub on May 9th and moved forward to Council, and we will have the barricades set up. The Parks and Recreation Department will have them dropped and ready to be set up by the Police Department for the parade. There is a map within your packet as well that shows where all the barricades would be. They're the blue dots on your map. And also this was discussed between myself and Deputy Chief Small. And this was the parade route and closures that was come up with.
Thank you. Any questions? Jonathan?
Is there a sort of a reroute for the 202 traffic around that? Or a detour planned?
Nope, it's just going to be shut down.
Okay. Thank
But
you.
shut down only during the time period that the parade's actually passing by.
Correct. So as they
So
head
that's pretty
south, the police have their four-wheeler or side-by-side that's going to be leading the parade, and they will be the ones to set up these barricades and block off the traffic.
Thank you. Any other questions? Bob?
Yeah, just a follow-up question, Brady. And this is no different than what we've done in the past, I think, with reference to 202. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah. So Again, we've done it before. It shouldn't be too concerning that we do it again.
Yeah.
Didn't cause a big
Seems to go
problem in the
smoothly
past.
every
Yeah.
year. All right,
Thank you, Brady.
thank you. Did I already do a first and a second? No. Can I have a motion, please? Nate,
I'll move to approve the street closures as presented for Memorial Day Parade on May 29th, 2023.
thank you. A second, Jonathan?
Second.
All those in favor? Thank you. 23-20801, order to accept the street closure as proposed for July 3rd and July 4th activities and parade. Brady?
Yes. We'll be doing the same thing as last year. We'll be closing down the streets around Number 1 Pond to hold our 3rd of July vendors and fireworks. Vendor setup is around 2 p.m., where the streets will be fully closed off around 4 p.m. It might be a little bit sooner than that, depending on how things start to fill up. That's kind of a judgment call that's made. The ski show will be at 6 and the fireworks at 9 or so, depending on how dark it is. The rain date for this event is July 2nd, and the parade will take place on the 4th of July, starting at 10 a.m. The streets that we will be lining up on this year to start and head north and end at Goen Park Drive are Stilson, Goodrich, Breton, Maurice, Malcolm, Schuler, Morris, and Carver Street. And that's all dependent upon how many registrations we have. So if we don't need all of those streets, we won't use all of those streets. And Steve has a map up of where the water barricades will be. There's also going to be additional street barricades at the top of Goen Park Drive, Front Street, and Summer Street, so that people don't drive down and have nowhere to go. And also Lincoln Street will be left open, so the barricades will be further north at that intersection, so people can still drive up and take a left onto Lincoln, or from Main Street, a right or left, you know what I mean?
Thank you. May I have a motion, please? Bob?
So moved.
Thank you. A second more?
Second?
Any questions? All those in favor? Thank you. 23-175-01, in order to approve the closure of the rec area Halsworth Park during the day for summer camp on the dates specified. And I noticed that these are different this year, and thank you. I think that'll work really well. So go ahead, Brady.
Thank you. So last year we obviously did this midsummer. This year we're planning for it ahead of time. We're looking at Tuesdays and Thursdays. Tuesdays will be the younger kids. Tuesdays and Wednesdays, excuse me. Wednesdays will be the older kids, and Tuesdays the younger. Camp starts June 19th and ends August 18th. That includes our 2 bonus weeks. So we're proposing that they get closed down both Tuesday and Wednesday through this time frame. In the event that our camps don't attend, we'll have the park open to the public. We do have multiple camps that run out of the pavilions and attend the rec area all day, up to 200 kids or so. This will make it easier on staff to differentiate between the public from our camps, also helping the lifeguards differentiate the public from our camps. And this will create a safer environment, and that's the real point of this. We know who's in the park. With the closure, it allows our staff to be able to call the police if the public does not apply or abide by the rules. And I think one big point to make on this is at our end of the year staff meeting last year, our camp directors and waterfront staff really expressed how they hope this can continue in the future, because it made their lives much easier. And it made it easier tracking the kids, and also just knowing who's there and keeping everybody as safe as possible who are under our watch.
Thank you. May I have a motion, please? Ann?
Madam Mayor, I'd like to make a motion to approve the closure of the rec area during the day for summer camp as presented.
Thank you. Nate?
I second that motion.
Thank you. Any questions? All those in favor? Thank you. 237701, thank you, Brady. To ordain amendments to the city code section 149-5, license rental housing and other sections of the code to establish additional requirements for short-term rentals and requirements for documenting property insurance for all rental housing and including amending the fee schedule for lodging establishment. This item must be read on 2 separate days. This is the first reading. Do I have any comments? Ann, you had some comments on this one?
Can I make a motion to discuss, or do we need it?
We don't make motions on, this is the first reading.
All right. Then I'm happy to start with some questions.
Yep, go ahead.
So first, and I do have a few, but it seems we left out the rural residential area. Was that on purpose?
Yes, so in that area, you can have short-term rentals as you see fit. And I did pull the definition of a primary residence in between. Would you like me to explain that?
Sure.
Sure.
So it's an individual's main residence or dwelling where he or she usually lives, typically a house or a unit in a multifamily structure. An individual can only have one primary residence at a given time, though he or she may share the residence with others. So if you go away for the winter, then this still qualifies as your primary residence. But if you never live there, this would not qualify as your primary residence. So it's saying that in the urban zone, the single-family zone, the rural the RD zone, it has to be your primary residence. You may have short-term rentals, but you just may not have exclusively a short-term rental. We do have some pretty interesting and stellar short-term rentals in the RD zone, in the RMU zone and the RR zone. There's a treehouse place that was built specifically for that activity. So this really was trying to avoid tampering with that activity where it's more rural and there wouldn't be as much interference with what's normally housing.
Would they still be required to maintain the insurance and licensing standards just to?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Just doesn't have to be their primary residence.
And we do capture them currently in the rental housing license. There just aren't these additional requirements. And I understand that these are Airbnbs, so they're meeting those insurance requirements through their Airbnb relationship. So Airbnb makes them carry insurance.
May I continue? So in terms of the, I guess I have concerns about the limitation in the urban zone with the primary residence requirement, in that a lot of our multi-unit properties in our urban zone are not, we have investment properties, let's say, and I would like to see the ability to have, I like the limitation on multi-unit properties, whether it should be 1 or 2 or whatnot, but I like that concept in the sense of we're not converting really important housing opportunities for folks to short-term rentals, or we're trying to balance that with economic development. But I can see real opportunities in our community with some of our aging and, say, problematic multi-unit properties in the urban zone, where if you could get an investor to look at them with a mix of long-term rentals and 1 or 2 short-term rentals, it could make the numbers a lot more viable for them. So I just wonder if we should reconsider, or if there's any other thoughts from my fellow council members on that piece.
So mostly consider the primary piece?
Correct, moving the urban zone properties out, taking the primary residence clause away from the urban zone. Does that make sense?
I'm
Meaning-
confused.
Or just specifically for multifamilies. So I see what you're saying. Keep it for the non-single family in the urban zone, but for a multi-unit, allow it to not be, because they're often not principal residences, right?
So would you, and now on the second piece, on the multi-unit, would you recommend a percentage of the property versus the one short-term rental?
I mean, that's an interesting concept, too. It makes the numbers much more viable, right? So when you look at these commercial properties, and I've looked at several multi-unit commercial properties in our urban zone, with the current listing prices for those, the numbers just don't work. So they become much more interesting to an investor when you have some allowance of short-term rentals. And I actually think that when you look at short-term rentals in some of these properties, it might also bring up the conditions of those rentals, because in order to be successful through VRBO or Airbnb, you're held to a really high standard. Like, you're going to want to make sure that your hallways are nice, that it's going to push owners to also beautify, I think, some of the property. So I would be in support of a percentage based on the number of units. I mean, because some are much larger and some are smaller.
Okay, Jonathan?
So I think that came up at the subcommittee meeting. Yeah, so I think the issue was, or at least the discussion around that was that long-term renters, there tends to be problems if you have this sort of in and out transient churn every day, very often. So it kind of disrupts the other tenants to have the short term. Am I remembering that correctly?
I think we were trying to keep it from, having too much.
Churn.
No, it's not only that, losing long-term housing stock when we so desperately need long-term
Right.
housing stock. I understand Ann's point because she's right. There are some properties that are in horrible condition, and I'm shocked at how much they're selling for, and the margins don't make it so that they're going to ever fix those properties out. But I'm not so sure it would go towards short-term rental these properties anyway.
Okay. Any other comments?
I mean, we'll discuss this at zoning again, just so you know.
Yeah. So it'll come back to us again, because this was the first reading.
Okay.
Right.
I'll let you know, Ronnie, on her way out, said as well that I put this to MMA Legal Services, and she suggested also putting this to MMA Insurance Services as well. So I'll be doing that as well prior to the zoning committee to get that insurance.
Fantastic.
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other comments?
Well, just a point of clarification,
Go ahead.
Ian. Earlier, you said for 30 days or less, but it actually is less than 30 days. We're trying to hit. That's the verbiage.
Is it
It's
less than 30 days?
I mean, there's a sales tax a lodging tax implication with that, so I just want to, is that the intent, that it's less than 30 days?
Less than 30
Okay,
days.
okay.
Bob, did you have a question? Okay. Oh, Nate?
Yes, it'll be brief. Ian, correct me if I'm wrong. When I was hearing your initial presentation, you mentioned something about if the owner does not reach this sort of insurance requirement, that they don't get what's called a good neighbor credit. I'm familiar with that. Can you tell me a little bit about what that is? And I may have a follow-up after that.
Yep. So under the rental license, there's what's called a good neighbor credit, and it's a 50% reduction in your fee. That good neighbor credit is based on getting your license in on time, not having serious code violations, having a plan of action in place to correct those code violations. Seeing if Jeannie's in the room anymore, and it's as determined by the code enforcement officer. So it's a credit that it's given for effectively being a good neighbor.
Okay, and so it's not like a state-run or federal thing. It's a municipally run determination about what a good neighbor is to get that credit.
Yep, and it's
Okay.
yes, it is, and it's spelled out exactly what qualifies in the ordinance under Article 5 of Chapter 149.
Great, thank you. That actually eliminates my follow-up question. Thank you.
Are we all set? Oh, Ann?
Sorry, I had one more. Just want to say out loud that I do have concerns about the lack of what I'll use the word grandfathering for existing VRBO and Airbnb properties that will not qualify under the principal residence rules for those folks who have really invested significant money in rehabbing some of our properties here in Sanford in the single-family residence, in these zones we're talking about, not including the 3 really cool ones you mentioned earlier that I was worried about in the rural residential zone. But just on Airbnb alone, without looking at VRBO or some of the others, it seems we have like 8 roughly Airbnb properties. And again, I just have concerns about that principal residence rule on those particular properties that already are in place. I certainly am 100% for licensing and whatever other requirements, but they, as investors, their pro formas, their projections were based on those being, short-term rentals. So that feels a little bit bad to me, I guess, for lack of a better word. And maybe that could be discussed at the subcommittee.
And I would also say that we have one in our neighborhood, and the neighbors are pretty upset about it being there. because of the amount of cars, the amount of traffic, the amount of people walking the streets and stuff, because it's such a big property with a huge amount of bedrooms, that it's housing probably parties you don't want next door to you. So I would say for that, I would say our neighborhood would be pretty up in arms if that continued. And they're assuming that once this goes through, that Airbnb, once their license runs out, they won't be back.
Yeah, I would encourage you to look at like which ones might actually be Airbnb, because the family might have gone to Florida for the winter or something, because we actually wrote it so that that would be okay. If it's still their primary residence, but they're in Florida, and maybe they're doing a little bit while they're in Florida, but they have as much interest in not upsetting their neighbors because they're coming back to that house. I think that was a little bit of allowance when we wrote it in there, but yeah, we're trying to get a handle before, we want something in place before we have multiple properties that become party houses.
No, and I really appreciate that balanced and thoughtful work that's being done. And I wonder if some of the issues in your neighborhood would be addressed within the existing verbiage about parking and occupancy. Do you know what I mean? Like, I wonder if that might be addressed. I just think it's a balance for those folks that have, and there are certainly investors in this list of properties I'm looking at. I happen to follow them on Facebook and social media, so I watch you know, some of the work they put in. So again, I'm just saying out loud, I'm not necessarily, I just think it's an area of concern. I think we have to continue to be thoughtful about it. So I would just ask you to look at, are we addressing problem properties with the verbiage, you know what I mean? And then properties that are not an issue might be okay because they're following the rules, so to speak.
All right, thank you. And moving right along, and
If I can. So I've been listening to the conversation, and I'm not looking forward to the next zoning subcommittee because there's a lot of complexities there to bring back up. I think things that I put in my notes. So we're talking about the economics of preserving properties, and that really goes to highest and best use at that point in time that preserves a property, right? We're talking about impacts that translate off-site. So that's what zoning is about, and the preservation of property owners' rights is that you can develop your property to the extent that the property can absorb the impacts, but when those impacts translate off that property's boundaries onto the adjacent properties, i.e., you know, too much activity, now you've created an impact, right? So short-term rentals can have that, right? So we're talking about that. We're talking about property development rights. We're talking about lessons learned from when they do rent controls in communities, what that does to the impact of the ability to maintain properties. There's a whole lot of things going on here. There's LD 2003 that talks about increasing the allowable density of housing, but at the same time saying, oh, except for short-term rentals, because you want to free up as much housing stock or create as much housing stock for housing opportunities as possible that is not short-term rental, because it doesn't address, you know, the workforce and LMI needs and such. So, boy, there's a whole lot to unwrap there. Yeah.
So we'll talk about it again.
Didn't help a bit, did it? But it's the economics. That's my primary concern. You know, I'm a physics major at heart. First law is, you know, equal and opposite reactions. First law of physics, the economics is no different than that. If you strap it down in one area, it responds different in other areas.
And maybe it's about looking a little bit more differently at the urban zone and the single-family residence zone. I would be in support of that. And I'm really, housing is a big issue. We hear it over and over again. So I really like that we're looking at this. I think it's really important. But I also want to recognize that we don't have lodging in our community, right? So when I don't know where your family stays. You know, they stay at the beach when they come. And, you know, so anyway, you know, I think when we think about, are there ways to embed some lodging opportunities through these sources like Airbnb and short-term rentals in a way that is thoughtful? You know,
Sadly, I hear what you're saying, and that's all of what we talked about. So we talked about that 100%, but we also are saying we want it, so we want to make it very flexible, but at the same time, we don't want neighbors, especially single-family houses in the same neighborhood. They shouldn't have to have that impact of poor management or off-site management, people just coming in to invest in order to have a property that they can make money off of, when they never should have been allowed to make that a rental to begin with, because it's in a neighborhood that doesn't allow it to, to speak of. So having someone on site, not necessarily on site, but having someone even anywhere nearby, helps prevent those problems. But, I mean, Jonathan was very clear, he wanted to encourage it. And we didn't want to discourage it, so we're talking about the ones that are existing now, which I think we have one or two problems with, but we talked about, hey, let's preserve those great little unique ones that are occurring. Let's make sure people have an opportunity to do it if they want to, configure a way to do it. We were very good with our accessory dwelling units. It's a great use of accessory dwelling units. So I think we talked about open it, and for the few that might get impacted, because they don't fit the mold of what we're trying to look for, I have a hard time working around those few situations that are existing now, when I think we've written a really good, long-term, very open, very beneficial. I think a lot of people might be able to do this and fall within the boundaries. I guess that's what I'm like. We really kept it open. We really, because we talked about that. We wanted people to be able to do this, but we didn't want it to be those places that everybody complains about in other towns. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Now I was just turning my head.
Okay, any other comments? Jonathan?
I guess I'll follow up to that a little bit, but yeah, I think we're trying to make it an option for people that want to do it, but we're trying to also minimize the impact to neighbors or other people within that same housing unit. So while I'm generally a minimalist as far as government oversight on things, I think that, making sure that the impact is minimized to neighbors is definitely an important consideration. So, thank you.
Thank you. Pete?
Yeah, I think everything says it with impact zoning. So if they're bothering a neighbor, I think what are there, 8 existing right now that I've heard for Airbnb? Oh, okay. For the Airbnbs, I think each one should be reviewed to make sure it's not an impact, because it was before we had this issue. So if we can go over those, on a subcommittee and intelligently make sure they're not upsetting anybody's property value, people wanting to move. We just want to make sure it's right. And if it's right, we'll pass them. Okay? Thank you.
All right, any other comments?
Sort of a
Jonathan?
follow-up comment. So it sounds like this is going back to the subcommittee. Ian, would you be able to pull the current short-term rental list and sort of any kind of complaints? I don't know if that's something you'd have available, but I think that would be helpful for the discussion.
Yes, we sure can pull the short-term rentals that are currently categorized as rental properties, just generally. And then we can also look through the Airbnb. Councillor Hanselman was saying that there's currently 8. When we started developing this ordinance, it was a couple months ago, and I think what happens is as the summer season rolls around, they start adding to them. So I haven't gone back to Airbnb to see what's changed in the last couple months.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, moving on. 23-114-01, in order to review and approve ordinance changes making permanent the emergency measures previously approved regarding the management of public parking in the School Street parking lot and the provisions of alternate off-street parking during snow emergencies. This item must be read on 2 occasions. This is the first reading. All right, any comments from the council?
Working well.
I think this is a good thing, what we did. We protected a lot of businesses. It was safer because we had transients living in that parking lot. I think this was just a win for Sanford. That's where I'm coming from.
All right. Maura, any comments? No? Oh, Jonathan?
Yeah, and I'll second the comment previous. It seems like it worked fine for the last couple storms that we had. Might have been only one storm, but I didn't really hear of any issues, and, you know, the lot was able to be cleared of some of the problematic cars and vehicles and trailers and things that were just sitting there, so I'm for this, thank you.
Well, thank you. Okay, anything else? Let's move on. 23 to 27-01, order to make appointments to various city boards and committees pursuant to Section 205.1 of the Sanford City Charter. Maura?
Hi, Madam Mayor. I'd like to make a motion for the following appointments. To the Sanford Arts Commission, which is new, Michelle Kellis, with an expiration date of 12/31/24. Emily Sheffield, same expiration date of 12/24. Evelyn Nitzberg, 12/24. Terry Jellerson, 12/24. David Parent, 12/25. Melissa Alapalo, 12/25. And Brett Williams, 12/25. That's for the Sanford Arts Commission. For the Sanford Housing Authority Board, to fulfill an unexpired term ending in December, at the end of the December 2023, Kendra Williams. And we are still looking for members of the Community Resilience Committee. We're going to be working on that. We did not want to appoint anybody until we have enough to make a minimum on the committee. The other thing I'd like to say is that we may have some out-of-town members of the Arts Committee. We're going to let them have a first meeting, put together a charge, see kind of what they're looking for when they put out, how many out-of-towners would they want on an arts committee, since it is more of a regional interest, and then they'll get back to us, and we did have one from out of town, so we might be appointing that person once they've made those decisions with the smaller group. Thank you.
Any comments on that? Jonathan?
That's my motion, by the way.
I'll second it, and then I have a comment or a question. So I'm not too familiar with the Community Resilience Committee, but if we're looking for more help there.
It's environmental.
Okay, maybe that's something Jordan can put out on one of the pages,
Yep.
if that hasn't been out there already.
It's
Okay.
out there.
All right, thank you.
I think it's confusing. We're gonna try to fix it.
Maybe we could change the name.
It's not Jordan's fault either.
All right, Ann?
I'm a little bit disappointed, might be a strong word, but I expected to see like a really robust Arts Commission committee. We didn't limit it. This is all that, except for the out-of-town folks, this is all who applied. Is that correct?
Correct.
Because we're hoping for 12 members total.
They like the committee they have. I think this is trying to get them to understand that to do what they want to do, they need a sanctioned committee through the city. And so we got some members, and that was Dave Parent really making an effort. And I think it'll grow once they realize they can pretty much still do what they want. It's just going to have some insurance protection for the events they want to have.
So I guess to say out loud, maybe concern's a better word, right? Will they be able to accomplish what they want to do with this small committee without?
They still have the other committee,
Okay,
and they
okay.
still have all the members of the other committee.
Okay, thank you.
Right. Thank you. So we've had a first and a second. Any other comments? All those approve? Thank you. All right. Any council member comments? Anyone with a comment this evening? Jonathan?
I have a question for Steve around the asylum seekers, and I don't know if I heard a number of how many are still in the local hotels. I think I heard that if some of them are not, but I haven't heard a quantity. I know we had the ones that were at the city hall, not here anymore, but I was just curious if we had a number.
Yes, so we are currently managing 25 families of a number between 125 and 130 individuals out of those 25 families. They're in one of our coordination meetings, it was made known that let's call it two different groups, right? There's a group that came through the city's general assistance program. They're being managed to one extent, and then there's a group that are being housed and or sponsored by other organizations and or entities that are not seeing the same level of attention.
Okay, thank you.
Any other council comments? Nate?
I know we kind of went over at length last week or during our last meeting, the emergency meeting, but I do want to echo the gratitude of the staff members of the city that have stepped up to address this unexpected development and the continued progress. It's not over, but would like to continue that thanks and appreciation. I'm also encouraged to hear during the city manager's report regarding a potential way we can work with the Layman Way Recovery Center. That is a program that I have worked with in my line of work. I've seen some great results produced from that to help people who are unfortunately in the bouts of drug addiction, and I think that I'm very encouraged and looking forward to seeing what we as a city may be able to do with that or do with them. And lastly, the Sanford Mainers baseball team is having their opening night June 9th. I will probably be mentioning this again right before they have a city council meeting on June 6th, but I would like to personally invite anyone here, including the city council, to attend opening night on June 9th, Friday, June 9th at 6:30.
Thank you. Any other comments? Ann?
I just want to congratulate the Sanford High School class of 2023's top 50 and top 10 that was recently announced. They really make our community proud and their parents proud. And then I do want to give a shout out to all of the parents of graduating kiddos. All the festivities are beginning now, and I can say this without crying because I do not have a senior this year. But there are kiddos whose accomplishment is just getting across the stage, right? And there's kiddos that accomplishment was through athletics or through clubs that they did, and I just really want to honor all of our students and how amazing they are, and I think they show that to us really frequently here in Sanford.
Thank you. Any other comments? Any future agenda items? We're all meeting out, aren't we?
I think so. We've been here for 4 hours. We're going on 4 hours.
All right. Look, I learned
like
to
you guys,
speed read. All right, let's adjourn this meeting